welcome to another podcast episode. Thank you for joining us. I have the pleasure of a friend bringing their friend along today. We have Kim and Samantha. Some of you will have had the pleasure of listening to Samantha on this podcast before. If you haven't already, make sure you go back and listen to that episode because there's some awesome truth bombs in there. But today I'm going to ask Kim, first of all, to give us a quick intro to yourself.
Hi, I'm Kim Minnick. I'm a fractional people ops leader. I'm generally just obsessed with like early stage people ops functions, performance management, and generally how much it sucks the way we do it. And employee engagement and just, generally creating a fever dream of content on LinkedIn.
Love it.
And I like plants.
Love a food. Which is great, by the way, because you've actually got some in your background, which is something I need to work on. Well, it's honestly a delight to have you here. And Sam, over to you to give yourself a little intro too.
Yes, I am a cultural anthropologist. And so I think very similar to like the obsession that Kim has with all things performance in workplaces and HR, I apply that same amount of obsession to understanding how people work and how communities form, and then how those show up at work, and how all of our cultural differences can help us thrive instead of being the reason that we're just not getting shit done. So that's me in a nutshell.
No, super. And I'm Claire. I'm nosy about everything. And that's why I have a podcast. So there we go. We all go well together. So this episode has been kicked off on the back of a post that you did, Samantha, that really got us thinking about performance, how we talk about performance, the language we use around it, and our expectations of people as we're building. I'm going to say it because we're going to touch on it at some point. High-performing teams, everybody's favorite terminology. So, Sam, I think it'd be great if you could just kick off by telling us a little bit about the post, what triggered it, and we can go from there.
Oh, this is a really good question. I think honestly, a lot of my LinkedIn posts recently have been coming from realizations I've been making about myself, about like what does, the expectations that I have on myself, what does giving it your all mean, what does being a high performer mean, can that fluctuate from time to time, or like if it's fluctuating, does that make you a terrible person? Is it right to expect yourself to be a high performer, and then like obviously within the workplace as well, or is it sometimes just okay to be average? And I think we live in a world where being average is a negative thing. And I can't remember exactly where I had read this or come across or like what exactly spurred that. But it was just kind of this reminder to me to say like, actually, it's okay to just be the status quo. Like you don't always have to go, being the big ball buster that's just doing all of these big, giant, crazy things that are over the top, which then reminded me so much of, because I've heard Kim say it in numerous occasions, this idea of like giving your employee, and it helped me like to be like, Sam, and like apply this logic to myself, but giving your employee a 3 means like it's great, like that like, well, I mean, like in the sense that like if your employee's doing their job, that's a thing that should be celebrated. You shouldn't be like, oh, you're doing your job, so that's only a 3, and like you actually need to be at a 5. It's like, like celebrate the fact that they showed up and that they are doing their job and that they are being like and so it's like, it's celebrate the fact that they are average and stop using this word average and expect it and seeing that as like a negative thing. I don't know. I feel like this is why I'm so glad that you're like, we need to bring Kim on, because I was just like, I am starting to brush the surface and peel back that initial layer of the onion where Kim has just like deep dove into like the center of it. And so I'm excited to just like hear those thoughts. But it's been something, that I've been mulling over that led to that post, to just be like, can we just start celebrating being average? Like, can we stop celebrating the extraordinary all the time? Because that shit is not sustainable.
Yeah.
Kim, go.
Can I just dive in? I mean, I think that as somebody who like deeply wants to impress everyone and also be the best ever, and like somebody told me to hurry up when they should have hugged me kind of childhood, I strive for excellence. I want excellence. I want to be the best. My identity and happiness sometimes hinges on it. And hey, guess what? Seasons of life happen. Like, I cannot always be the best. To Sam's point, that's not sustainable. And when we think about, in the workplace and an employee population or any set of numbers, averages will exist. Like, not everyone can be the best, and one person should not be the best all the time. Like, that should always kind of shift and rotate and change, which is why I think that language is so important, which is why I feel like a 3, even though we should be celebrating, like, hell yeah, you're achieving your job. Like, way to do what we asked you to do. And like, bonus, maybe you have a better work-life balance. Let's also celebrate that. But calling it a 3 out of 5, like, sick, great. I'm so pumped to come back to work tomorrow. Like, or can we use better language to make our points resonate and also like be okay with being average sometimes, because I think the language matters.
I have so many things to share, and I'm going to start with something that maybe is going a bit deeper meaning thing first of all. But I think part of the problem is we live in a society that focuses on being an excellent individual all through your educational system. And Sam, I think you and I ended up falling into education system when we were talking about some stuff last time. But I just think there's such a fundamental problem in terms of how we're taught to value ourselves and value success. And as someone from a sporting background, I've always viewed my success as part of a collective. Like, I play team sports. I cannot win a game on my own. I've always known I have to know my strengths. I have to know my weaknesses. I need to know the people that I need around me to be effective. I need to know what they need off me, what I'm communicating to them, what on the pitch they need to be for us to be successful as a team. But there's so much of the world of work that, despite us needing to be successful as a team, is hinged on your success as an individual, is my thought.
Yeah. I mean, as the only American on the pod right now.
Yep.
Screw the collective rugged individualism. Let's go, baby. But, you know, I do think like there's a part. I was cruising Reddit the other day, and it was one of those like anti-work posts, and it was something like, hey, salesperson, you didn't achieve your goals, you're fired. And it was like, but the company also didn't achieve their goals. What about the executives? And they're like, no, you. So I do think like we overweight, and I think it's perpetuated by like that sort of management structure and performance management and averages and 3s and blah. I think that, you know, that's kind of perpetuated and gross. Totally lost my train of thought. Got so excited, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, that's fine. I've got loads more questions to ask.
Yeah, I just think that like, yes, to your point, we should be looking at the collective, and we have to realize like, it can't always just be you all the time, right? Like, you have to step back. You have to appreciate the collective and realize we don't fail and succeed as individuals.
Yeah. I feel like maybe, Claire, you will either love me or hate me for this reference. We actually, last time I referenced Mean Girls, this time I'm going to reference Ted Lasso. Because good.
Preach.
Okay, we're all
preach, girl.
Yes. This show for me, I feel like instead of half of the BS leadership management training that is put out into the world, we should just ask everybody to watch like one season of Ted Lasso. And there is just so much to learn there. But it's the Jamie Stark, Jamie Stark, what is, anyway, I can't remember his last name exactly, but it's that idea where like he is seen as the best and he is held up in the spotlight and like he is constantly celebrated as like, without him we can't actually win a football match. And then he goes off to another league and like does his thing, and Ted Lasso helps the entire team realize that actually you can win matches without Jamie, because each one of you is exceptional in your own way. There are some of you that are going to be exceptional when it comes to penalties. There are some of you that are going to be exceptional when it comes to defense. There are some of you that are going to be exceptional only when the other team member from the opposite team is on the pitch. And when he's not on the pitch, you understand how he works. You don't understand necessarily how the other players work. Like, so it is an orchestra. And I think being able to recognize that, like, there are going to be some moments where we need you to play a little bit louder, and there are going to be moments when we need you to play a little bit more quietly, but that doesn't mean that the sound of the orchestra is messed up because you're not playing. And that doesn't mean that because the chief violinist isn't playing, that the music that the orchestra is playing is shitty. And so it's just like, I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to leave you both to unpack that.
I love that because I do think the
Yeah.
manager, I often use orchestra as an analogy because I do feel like as managers, as people leaders, as, influencers of culture in our organization, we have a responsibility to kind of play to the different strengths.
Yeah.
And not everybody can be hustling all the time. Like,
Mm.
give people a rest. It's all right.
I also have learned this on a personal journey. I always felt that a lot actually of the things I thought were my weaknesses have ended up being my strengths because of how I viewed the world of work. And, I'm a generalist, but one of my strengths is really understanding and seeing where people are great. So when I was building teams, I was able to build teams of people that complemented each other. I would be able to identify when someone would be great in a certain area and elevate them in that situation. And that ended up being my strength rather than what I thought I needed to have, which is be absolutely excellent at engineering. For example, when I was leading engineering teams, I'm not an engineer, I don't write code, but what made me successful is how I could build those teams to work well together. And I totally agree. I think that point of being able to know when you've got someone in your team who's going to be awesome in this area and it's going to elevate them, but that also elevates the team, and getting the team to view it in that way I think is super powerful. But I would like to go back to something that we've touched on a bit here around excellent and outstanding, because my gut on a lot of this is our definition of those things is wrong, that it's this permanent state of smashing out the park. That is not high performance, that is not excellence, because it doesn't exist. No one person is smashing it out the park all the time. But I would love to know, like, Kim, maybe first of all, kind of what does excellence and high performance and outstanding and all these jazzy words really mean?
Ooh, so I think first, I would love to recommend a book to everybody. It's by Anessa Fike. It's called I might get some of these words misordered, but Fuck the Patriarchy and the Workplace It Built. It's a revolution of work book. And I think one of the really interesting things that she explores in that book is this idea of outstanding and excellence is kind of made for a very singular type of person. The type of person who the workplace was really built and constructed for, the type of person who maybe has more disposable time at their hands and less caregiving or, external demands on their time. So if we just look at excellence in this vortex of work, it's really easy to say, like, here's high performance, here's what this looks like. But as we if we think about the future of work and looking forward and building more sustainable workplaces that are genuinely outstanding and excellent, I think we have to look at the whole person and then define excellence. So it's like we have to stop rewarding hustle culture. We have to say, like, hey, part of excellence is being able to do your job in the defined time, which, shout out to the 4-day work week folks. Shout out to people who are limiting like a 40-hour work week, because we can only be so productive as humans until we, I assume, reach some cap because we're no longer having time for creativity or boredom or space away from work. So how we define it today versus how we should define it, I think, are two very different things. And I would hope that workplaces start thinking about defining excellence and including breaking away from work.
Yeah. I think also, this is so interesting as we're like, I love when we get into the nuance of things and like semantics. And I guess my first thought is when you're taking it back to, again, who the workplace was built for, if we think about from a Western lens, workplaces originated in an industrial setting where excellence was like your measure of excellence was your ability to repeat things with the smallest margin of error, right? And so if you're working in a factory setting and you're the person who is, punching a hole in a sheet of metal, if you can be consistently punching a hole in a sheet of metal in the exact same location at a certain rate, then you're an excellent performer. And so we've, I think, maintained that definition without even realizing it and brought it into workforces where we don't need people to do that anymore.
Mm.
And this is where I read something that really rubbed me the wrong way at first, and now I'm obsessed with it. And I feel like that's often how these things go. But it was saying that we're moving into a future where AI will be responsible for productivity and humans will be responsible for everything else. And at first I was just like, ooh, I don't know how that feels. But then I sat there and I was like, well, yeah, like let the robots punch the holes meticulously into the sheets of metal, and we can measure their performance on how they're able to do that consistently. Let the humans actually do what humans are designed to do, which is to think and to innovate and to be critical of what is happening. But in order to do that, how do you measure the excellence of an idea? You can't, right? And so for me, it's like, as long as we are measuring somebody's ability to be excellent or outstanding, we are limiting them to tasks that are menial and that could be done by a robot or by an artificial intelligence, and we're not letting them live out their full human potential. So in theory, by measuring somebody on their excellence, you're bleeding money because you're paying somebody to do the work without that something for free could almost be doing, and you're not actually leveraging them for what they really could be bringing to your organization, which is their diverse experience and their thought and their creativity and their perspectives and worldviews that are going to help totally differentiate you in the market. And I just sit there, and it's like, when you unpack it that way, you sit there and you're just like, this feels like a no-brainer. Like, why? You know?
And I would argue, thinking about performance and excellence and punching holes and evaluating it, like pay for performance strategies inherently do not reward failure. Because if you're consistently failing, you're probably not achieving goals. Maybe, who knows, but let's play it out.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, you're not getting that excellence. You're not getting that opportunity. But look how much you've experimented, innovated. Have you failed in a way that is helpful? So I think there's so much in conflict with how we think about performance, evaluating that, communicating it, and then, dare I say, rewarding it.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so juicy.
I know. I love, Kim, watching you almost explode with every word that's coming out of Samantha's mouth as it inspires you with more thoughts. But there's another theme that's kind of coming out here for me of, are we still focusing too much on rewarding people's time investment rather than value add investment? Go, Kim.
Yes. I would like to first get on my soapbox about like 40-hour work weeks. And in America, we have something called the Fair Labor Standards Act. Also in America, we have this fun thing where we tie health insurance to employment. And a lot of these like are regulated by hours, 32 hours a week and above. You're full-time, you're eligible for health care. So like how is that influencing the American society? But also, like, do we need to update this idea of productivity and hours? I think that's what I see a lot in my fractional HR and my solopreneur communities is folks are like, look, I can get this work done in a shorter amount of time. And how can I curate the rest of my life so I can still grow professionally, but not be burdened with full-time employment and all of the hours stipulations that come with it. Wild how we think about time and employment and accomplishments. And how come,
Massively.
like, if I get my work done and my peer doesn't, how come I have to do more work? Why can't I just go home early?
Yeah. Give me a half day and a beach day or something, guys. Come on. Sam, I'd love to kind of reflect you on that point around what we value in our cultures as well. I think your example there around the Western world, but have you worked within different cultures where they just totally value different things that have influenced how they recognize and reward their employees?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because a lot of major cities, no matter where in the world you go, replicate this Western ideal, which is such a shame. It's part of what leads to like, assimilation and all these types of things. So, but we look at it like no matter where you go, right? Like you'll see in Japan, like a lot of people will talk about how like Japanese people have different values and all these kinds of things. But then when you look at like the major cities like Tokyo, a lot of people who have spent time there will tell you, yeah, but it's still like the unrealizable expectations on, productivity, how often you're working, how many hours you're working, like all of these kind of things. Like the fact that they have a word in Japanese for people who die at work, like it's bananas. But then when you actually move outside of the major cities, that's where you start to see a lot of these huge differences. And what's interesting is that in North America, we have this really, I'm going to be careful with the words that I choose. We have an interesting relationship with working and then stopping work in terms of retirement. So we see work as like this means to an end, where it's like if we pour in a ton of hours now, when we have the most amount of energy and the most amount of like mental capacity and all of these kinds of things, we can get to a stage in our lives where we can stop working 100%. And usually that period in our life when we stop working 100% is when we have less energy and we have less of a mental capacity and like all of these kinds of things. And so whereas you look at other parts of the world, and often they're the parts of the world that have people who live like well into their hundreds, and their secret to longevity is that they never stop working because they're doing something that is very much like tied to who they are. It's in a lot of alignment, but they're also working in a very sustainable way, right? These are also cultures who are going to take longer breaks in the middle of the day. These are cultures that are, going to spend time with family, and they're going to see that as just as important or just as much of a priority, right? So that work-life balance that like we have a term for in North America because we're not doing it. But a lot of the other places for centuries have just seen it as like, well, of course I'm going to balance my work and my life. Like work is not the end all be all. But why is it not the end all be all? Because there's no finite date when I have to stop it. I can just keep working. And so I feel like there's less of this pressure to, like I look at my dad, and he is an entrepreneur. He's turning 70 in December. And a lot of people will ask me like, well, does he have any plans to retire? And I'm like, no, my dad will be literally on his deathbed and still taking client calls because he is obsessed with the work that he does. And it energizes him, like it brings him joy.
Yeah.
But he also will take time in the middle of the day to go paint his deck or to help, my stepmom with like moving certain things or like, fixing up her shelves in her craft room or like whatever the case may be. So I think when you look to other cultures, one of the biggest things that we need to get over is that like, and it sounds so counterintuitive because we struggle to detach from work so much, but it's almost like we need to stop seeing like I'm working really hard so I can get to a point where I have to stop working, and instead just see it as like, if I'm doing the work that I love and I see the impact that it's having, I can continue this work forever. So there's no longer this like hustle to like get it all done and accomplish it all before I turn 50. It's like, well, I have until I'm 100 to accomplish this work. So maybe that means that I can take a long weekend, or maybe it means that I can stop working after 4 days or like whatever the case may be, or after, 3 hours in the day as opposed to 7 or whatever, because I have a longer time to achieve what I'm trying to do. That obviously does not impact that. I'm speaking from a solopreneur perspective. Obviously, when you're in a workplace, this is completely impossible. And I understand to like bring that, or that's a longer process. But I feel like our relationship with retirement is one of those things that impacts how we go about work and accomplishment.
I don't like the feelings you just made me feel. Like the way you were talking about the North American relationship of coming up to retirement and then fully stopping work, like that is an idea I have struggled with for a long time because like this is so gross. I genuinely love people ops. I love thinking about how you're designing your HRIS system. I love thinking about that reporting. I love thinking about how that builds a foundation for performance management. And just because I don't want to be in-house up until the age of 65, so I can start cashing in America Social Security retirement check, I do want to continue this work in a way that fills my cup. And it was something that I went on a like 4-week journey earlier this year, really thinking about what does a fulfilling life look like, knowing I have an obsession with people ops and place a lot of my value on work and accomplishments. That's a conversation I'm having with my therapist. It's fine. But also how do I, that does incorporate into a world where I get to, maybe travel more or spend more time with family or be able to go somewhere for 2 to 4 months and just kind of experience, something new. Wild to think about how our society has impacted that and looking beyond. How do we think about retirement? And I don't think you can separate income from this, but how do you
No.
think about longevity in the workforce and celebrating a tenure like that? Like, it's just wild.
Yeah.
So
So
much of
true.
this for me comes back to some of what we've just been talking about, which is how we view success. And we often in our Western worlds view it through material things, which means you need to earn money and you need to have the title and you need to be able to say you've done this thing. But so much of, and I don't know if it's turning, hitting my 40s and being reflective, but I just feel like everyone I speak to is hitting that point where they're like, none of those things are the things I thought they were going to be. Like, you want to get the new car and it's really exciting for a week, and then you realize it's just a fucking tin can you still need to get MOT'd and serviced and pay a fortune on, and fill up with petrol every week. It's like this constant chase for attaining the next thing. And I think businesses are in a similar state. And one of the things I was thinking about is, and we've touched on a bit already, is like, how do we really balance this constant need for more and better with our human capacity? Because we've touched on this already a bit in this conversation, but we all have limits. And maybe it is what you said, Samantha, around us really thinking about how we use AI better alongside how we think about the value that humans really bring and deliver. But so much of that is always going to come back to, how are we measuring what good looks like within a business? How are we measuring what our individuals are doing to say, they can be in the business for 10, 20, 50, 100 years. And also, Kim, my takeaway from your comment is that you are going to live to 100 because you're doing the thing that brings you joy. So that could be a nice experiment for us.
I'm excited to have 100-year-old us redo this podcast. Yeah. I think this is going to be fun. We should for that.
Amazing. Yeah, you're touching on a lot of really interesting things. When growing up, I did not have the most lavish upbringing, but I remember the definition of success: big house, fancy cars, disposable income, your own little plot of land, compound. And then I moved to San Francisco and spent a few years in 500 square foot apartment, 400 square foot apartment with my husband and my 85-pound dog. Like, you become a lot more intentional with what you bring in and like what success looks like. And instead of valuing things, we started to value our time a lot more, because we don't need more stuff. We went down to one car. We live in a community that we can walk in. We are redefining the definition for success for us means more time and being able to do the parts of work that we genuinely love, that we can focus on and be in our zone of genius so we can have really great impact. And all of that is like new and weird and squishy definitions of success that are uncomfortable in like a curiously exciting way.
I love it. I think it's as both of you are talking, I'm like, my brain's going into the neurology real fast because of like what happens in our brain that then ends up, creating this situation for us. And it reminds me a lot of, so similar, like opposite, but like a similar vibe to what you were talking about, Kim, where it's like with the definition of like success when you were younger. And it's funny because like I grew up in a middle-class family, but I have a lot of memories of my dad and I used to love walking through new housing developments. Like that was just our weird, fun, exciting thing. And we'd like sneak into them and like look at them like while they were just totally, the wood structures, whatever. And I remember walking by once as they were all finished. And they're these like huge mansion, houses, whatever. And walking by and like really being in awe and being like, wow, Dad, like look at how amazing these houses were. And my dad's response on a regular basis was, yeah, Sam, but they're not really happy. And I would always be like, ha, 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 and I would just like joke. And he didn't mean it in like a, sad way, but it was just kind of it has always stuck with me because and now I know, like, I don't get into the neurological reason for why this kind of comment is really important. But when we look at what other people have, we decide for ourselves how happy they feel. And then there's this thing called mimetic desire, which is where our brain goes and says, it assigns a value to what they're feeling. And then we go and we say, well, we want that same value in our life. So we're going to do what they're doing to achieve whatever feeling they're feeling right now. The issue is that we don't have a lot of insight into other people's lives. So all we see is what they show us, which means that when we see people on Instagram who are showing their amazing lives, or on TikTok, or we drive by a big house with a fancy car and all these things, that's why this comment from my dad is something that stuck with me, because it's this reminder to say, what you see and what you're assigning intrinsic value to is not actually the reality of things. Who knows? Maybe they are with their 6 Porsches in the driveway and their beautiful car, their house. Maybe they're living their best life. And if that's the case, like, more power to them. But it's being able to stop our brains in our tracks when we see somebody else who is doing something. And it's really about the feeling. Like, when we see them feeling a certain way, our brain goes and says, I want that feeling. What is in that current little square that I'm seeing on my screen that I have now determined is giving them that feeling? I now need to have those things. And so then we bring those things into our life, whether it's, a certain partner that we're looking for, or, getting a pet, or certain home decor, or a job, or like whatever the case, whatever we've decided, we bring this into our life. And then this, coupled with the fact that our brain is constantly trying to achieve homeostasis so that it is not burning out energy, on all cylinders, our brain gets a little bit of a dopamine hit because we're like, this is really exciting. But firstly, they're not actually things that speak to us. So to your point, Kim, right? It's like all of those material things are not important to you and your partner, but the time is. So if you're bringing all of these material things, your brain's going to be like, oh, this doesn't actually make me happy. So it starts to come back down. And then you also have your brain trying to regulate again. So it's also going to be like, we can't constantly be spiking dopamine. So we're going to bring this back down. And you end up being sad again. And you're just like, well, why didn't that work? So the thing to people that I always tell them is like, the mimetic desire, get control of that. When you see other people experiencing happiness, rather than saying, what are they doing that is making them happy and I need to replicate that, ask yourself, what do I need to be doing to feel the same thing as they're doing, but for myself? Like, how can I bring this back into what is important to me, what is valuable to me, and stop trying to replicate? And it's so hard because we live in a world where everybody is copying everybody, and we're told to, like fashion trends, right? Like, there's so many things, these systemic things that exist that tell us that copying people and mimicking people is how we survive in societies. But I think that's another cultural thing too, is when you move more into these less urban centers, people are comparing themselves less because there's more important things in life than figuring out what clothing, like, things just become a way to help you live your life as opposed to a way to build happiness.
Yeah. As an ADD brain, I love a dopamine hit. I love a dopamine hit. Give it to me.
I know.
As somebody who posts on LinkedIn a lot, I recognize even people just seeing me often. Some people have assumed greater success and they'll reach out and ask for help. And I'm like, I can give you my thoughts, but like, just because I'm talking does not, don't try and emulate this. How can we do it? How can you do your own thing?
Yeah.
But gosh, like, I do agree. When my husband and I used to live in San Francisco, part of the VC startup scene. I could not run faster on that hamster wheel, y'all. Like, give me that next rung. And then global event. I think a lot of us had a shifting of priorities. And we left San Francisco. And we live in a smaller, still very walkable, like still, city. It's in a town. Somewhere in between. But yeah, we do value different things now. My mind drifts more to gardening than it does career ladders now.
I love it.
Yeah,
which
love
is so
that.
nourishing. Like, we know the science that comes from that.
Yeah,
like,
and Sam,
spending time
I think
with
there's
nature.
so
Go
much
ahead.
about.
We're just taking over your podcast.
No, I'm loving it. You crack on. But I think there's so much about what you said that is applicable in the workplace as well, in terms of like, you see these people behaving a certain way and getting a promotion or getting a pay rise or getting the job title. And that makes you think, okay, I need to do the grind. I need to do this, rather than as creating examples of things that actually are more sustainable. So just to kind of loop it back round a bit, we've probably pulled apart society, which is important, right? But that can feel overwhelming for everybody. So what can managers be doing? How should we be talking about performance? How should we be acknowledging and talking about what good looks like, or celebrating average? And I think just there's so much attached to that word average that causes problems. But how do we create a more sustainable workforce for people?
Yeah, I mean, I'll offer some thoughts. One, I think talk about expectations, performance, underperformance. Talk about that early and often. If you've been in one of my onboardings, you've probably heard me talk about a performance improvement plan. You probably have access to a copy of it. On day one, that feels wild, but I want you to know, like, hey, none of this is meant to be scary or secretive or something to worry about, but look at all the tools we have in our tool chest. And you should be aware of them. And now you as managers, how do we give them the tools to, again, hey, here's what's going really great. Here is where, things feel a little off. Start that conversation early. Like, things feel a little off. I am seeing the palest yellow flag. How's it going? What's up? And I think if we start thinking about feedback as more than just corrective or negative, but feedback is also, hey, you smashed it here, or like, hey, great job, or hey, thanks for putting your out of office on the calendar this afternoon and communicating it with the team. Way to do some asynchronous practices. I think we can celebrate a lot of things to really kind of reinforce what we're hoping for in the workplace. And the more we talk about it, the less scary it is. And the more we use normal language. Oh my gosh, use normal language. People ops professionals, myself included, I read some of my old documents and blah, blah, there's so much corporate speak and like, man, you should have a thesaurus, but a lawyer would be proud. I think we can normalize the language because people are going to go home and their friends or their parents or their support system are going to say, hey, how's it going at work? And wouldn't it be nice for them to say, things are going really well, or, oh man, I'm having a hard time. I know I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. And then maybe somebody in their life can help them too. So like clarity is kindness, I guess, is the long way of saying it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. I think your point on expectations is, I think, so crucial. And often I find when I'm speaking to businesses and managers about the challenges they're facing, it always comes back to the fact they've just not defined their expectations. They're sat in their head, they've not said them out loud, they've not written them down, they've not been consistent about them, or they've not given consistent feedback, to your point, Kim, around them. So how do we balance that expectations with what high performance is, or I'd love to know kind of what you think good performance management looks like. So I get very much the concept of continuous feedback and building that in, but the whole numbering system that just has so much emotional value assigned to it. We have a big thing in the UK, I'm sure you have them as well, around bell curves historically, where there's the shimmy people in. So there's a lot around that people just think 3 is, oh, I've been shimmered into a bell curve. Great. Yeah.
So I'm a little old school in my practices and I do like a bell curve. But I like to it's data, right? Data will create a bell curve. I do think we should understand the ratings distribution. With giant asterisks here, right? That rating distribution should change and shift a little bit with business performance, with seasons of life, with time of year. Not everyone can always be outstanding. And if you are at that top end of the bell curve, you've probably outgrown your role. Or you're at the top end of something and maybe you're not going to move from there. But again, in populations, an average will exist. When we evaluate, a bell curve will take place. We shouldn't force it. And also, let's share that data. Let's be open and honest about it. Let's be really clear about how we think about it, how folks should move through. One time I was a high performer. I got a 5. I was promoted. Woo! My next performance review, I was a 2. So I went from one end of the bell curve to the other because I was being evaluated at a different level and I was new to it. So I think like that needs to happen. And if we're talking about that well and using proper language, I like things like instead of a 1, you're underperforming. Let's be real. Let's be honest about it. This isn't, something's off here. Let's talk about it. 2, still learning. You might be new to the role. You might be recently onboarded. You might be recently promoted. 3, you're nailing it. You're nailing it. Great job. This job's tough. Thanks for doing it. 4, wow, you're having beyond impact. You're outperforming. And 5, you're probably ready for the next level. So if we humanize that language to allow for the throws that come with new roles, I think it sets that expectation better. And when folks can see, oh, look, the bell curve shifted downwards, but we had a lot of promotions last cycle. So of course, like, it's all a journey and it's not good or bad. I think Sam and I have talked about this before, but like, these should be water stops on a marathon, you know? And to that point, rewards and recognition should mimic that they are brief little water stops. And every performance increase or every compensation increase can't be huge and life-changing and dramatic. And sometimes, you know, again, we're flowing. Obviously that statement is made with so much privilege and thinking about, you know, open and transparent compensation systems tied with performance. To your point earlier, Sam, I'm always scared I'm going to say the wrong thing on a podcast, but generally speaking, you know, that's how I like to think about labeling performance, gathering data based on those labels, sharing that data openly and honestly, and talking about how that data impacts reward decisions.
Yeah, so I think on the bell curve bit, I'm a lot of this stuff actually. I have certain things that I have really strong views on, but I'm not here to judge anybody's approach to anything. What I think, where I get really frustrated is that conversation, right? I think the problem with all of these things, whether they're seen as controversial or not, is the inability to be honest, businesses' ability to be honest about what they are, what they use them for, what it means for the individuals, and then for managers to be confident having those conversations as well. I think that fundamentally is what a lot of it comes back down to, is that transparent, open communication around it. And I think you made a really good point there. I mean, rewards a whole new topic in itself, but I do think that is what is hinged to so much of the performance review cycle, that people get a 3. They're not, I don't think people are always like, oh, I'm average. They're thinking, I'm not getting a pay raise, I'm not getting a bonus, or I'm not getting this, or I'm not getting that, rather than, oh, people think I'm average.
Okay, challenge to every business out there. When you start talking about performance management and you tell people reviews are coming up and you proactively share those ratings and what they mean, go ahead and share the anticipated compensation increase. Give a range. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I do think, again, setting expectations. If you go to a restaurant and the wait is, we'll be with you soon, or the wait is 15 minutes, 15 minutes feels better. At least, you know, even if both take 12. So I do think like the challenge that I would put out to folks is, to your point, hey, businesses, be honest, just be open. Like, start recognizing this is not a family. This is an employment relationship. We are paying you for your contributions and or time, however you define it. Yeah, good thoughts. Thanks, Claire.
My brain is constantly ticking. Sam, I'm sure you've got loads to add to that as well.
I have so many thoughts. I've just been listening, and it's so great because I have been reviewed for my performance so many times as an employee, and then went into my own business and have just haven't even touched it with a 10-foot pole, to be honest, because I'm like, there's so many problems that I'm not qualified to handle them. So just point everybody in Kim's direction. She has a white paper. Go and download it. But yeah, I think in terms of the transparency thing, I will take it a step further from the cultural diversity standpoint to say, like, we need to be in that onboarding process. And I love, Kim, that you talk about doing the pips in the onboarding to be like, this is not a scary thing. I agree that I think workplaces have turned it into this weird manipulative thing that is just like, if you end up on a performance review, like a performance improvement plan, it's basically the end of your time at this company. And it's just really a matter of like the company's just putting you on this because they don't have the time to like, or the money to pay your severance. And so they're just waiting until more revenue comes in. Whereas like a performance improvement plan should be exactly that. It really is just like, okay, let's like, maybe you need a mentor, maybe you need a little bit of extra support. Maybe there's a resource. Is there an online course that we could be signing you up for so that you could be like, that for me is, so I like the idea of talking about it from the very beginning of the person's tenure at a company, because then you de-vilify it and you actually allow it to be what it's meant to be. And then you can also put it in the hands of an employee for them to, I don't know, maybe one day even come and say, I would like to be on a performance improvement plan because I have things that I need to improve and I'm feeling stuck and I'm not really sure where to go from here. So can we talk about me enrolling or enlisting? And, you know, like, I love the idea of it being seen as a tool. And I think in a similar vein, being able to talk about the words that we use to evaluate. So like, what does engagement mean, right? Like, we, across cultures, engagement means a variety of different things. Good communication is a variety of different things. Discipline, autonomy, right? Like, so many of these words. So we can set those expectations with our team members to say, you know, on this team, it's going to be really important to be highly autonomous. You know, discipline is something that we really value, whatever. But then we do that with the expectation that we share a common definition, and that is absolutely not the case. Even people who grew up in like a city different from yours, you're going to have varying definitions of, you know, what that looks like. So that's the step further that I take it usually is saying, like, you, with your team, it might sound elementary, but like, sit down and actually say, this is how I'm operationalizing these words. This is how I'm using them. This is what they mean to me. What do they mean to you? If what they mean to you doesn't really align with what we need on this team, then let's have a conversation about maybe there's a better word that does, or, you know, I'm going to set my expectations and let you know. And then if that's something that you're not willing to live with or whatever, then let's talk about a different plan. And I think like normalizing, letting employees walk out the door when they've got that transparent information and they don't like it, instead of forcing them to comply, just being like, okay, no problem. Like, then let's talk about what's an environment where you maybe will find greater alignment. And that's a win-win. So yeah, I would say like, operationalize those words. It seems like a waste of time. It saves you so much heartache and pain and terminations for the wrong reasons down the line, which saves money. We like dollar signs.
We like dollar signs. Just a real quick plug for GitLab Team Ops Work Philosophy. It's a really cool, GitLab is a fully distributed company. They are huge on transparency and huge on codifying everything. And in that vein, they created Team Ops University, where you can go learn about this structure. And like, something they talk deeply about is explaining words and like, how do you define good communication? And in a people ops role, like, that's our career ladders. We need to go deeper than great communication or proactive. Like, we need to talk about, you know, the impact, how far and wide that's reaching, the success, the skills, the knowledge, the abilities, not just great communicator. To who? Love those.
I think this goes back to value. You know, the whole just saying some words and saying they're your values have zero meaning. Like, what are the behaviors that sit underneath those? That how are people living these values? How it's the same with everything. I think we're just, you know, Sam and I spoke about this in our last chat. It is very much, we just make so many sweeping assumptions that people think or use the same language for the same meanings, and it's one of the biggest headaches that we cause ourselves a lot of the time. I think it's just be explicit, give as many examples of good and bad as you can of these things, and be honest about it. And Sam, you both made this point, but something I feel so strong about is just because this environment isn't right for you does not mean you are not good at your job or you're not a good human being. We assign so much of our value to the environment that we're in. And businesses have a duty to be upfront about who they are so people can opt in or out. And I love to think about it like a community. What is your community about? What is your purpose for existing? What is it going to be like to be part of this community? And people opt to be part of that or they don't. And we just pin so much on too much old school way of doing things that costs us a freaking fortune and causes so much misery for people that is not the best use of everyone's time and energy.
No, 100%. I see it very much like traveling, and like if that simplifies it for people who are listening and like trying to figure out how do you be transparent enough that people opt out, because then if you're transparent enough, like how do you get like I feel like people just there's tons of questions that come up, but for me it's very much when you travel to a different country, you're right away, just like we're doing in a workplace, we're evaluating, is this a place where I feel comfortable, at ease, where I feel alignment, and where I could envision myself spending a longer period of time. Sometimes the answer is hard no, actually get me on a plane, I need to leave right now, and I literally just left customs. Other times it's actually, I could see myself living, like I have this with France, my fiance is from France, and like we've talked about maybe going back at some point and like living there, but I've been very explicit with him that I don't see myself spending my life there, because I just don't, like I can spend maybe 2-3 years in France, and beyond that I'm going to start getting really angry. So I just, I'm like, France is my short-term stay place. Similarly to in a workplace, you can be really transparent, and an employee might say, this doesn't feel fully aligned in the long term, but that doesn't mean that I can't spend a year or two with you, helping you out, doing all of this. And then 2 years from now, I'm actually going to move on to something else that feels more aligned. And I think like this normalizing short tenure in a workplace is important as well. Instead, like I know we spend so much money and invest in onboarding people and getting them up to speed. I think there are so many ways that we can still solve that. And like reduce that, whether it's like really solid onboarding, like Kim says, if there's, I don't know, like automating information, like there's so many things that we can be doing to reduce that spend. So for me, it's not a valid excuse to say, well, we can't have people leave in 2 years because then we're losing money. But like, normalize somebody coming in for a year. And then like the amount of times you ask people in an interview, like, what's your 5-year goal? And it's like, this is an absolute trick question, because if I tell you that I'm heading towards something that quite frankly has nothing to do with the new helium gas machine that you're building, you're going to go and ask what my loyalty is, and you might not hire me. So now somehow I have to come up with this like giant mission that like, I just want to change how parties are organized and healing, like, so I feel like we need to, in order to actually encourage people to spend time with us and engage in our organization, the transparency is one thing, but then also understanding that there are those consequences to transparency and no longer villainizing them and saying when people move on from our organization, it's a good thing. It creates space for new movement.
One of the best emails I ever got, I just started it was a new job. My first startup hired one of the co-founders, Matt Mishkovitz, emailed me. And I'm sure he did this for every new hire, but it was, I hope this is one of the best stops of your career. And something like, can't wait to see what you learn here and can't wait to see what you go on to do next. Like, it was very normalized. Yeah. And about 2 years later, I had hired a team around me. I had had a boss. My boss sat me down and we had a very good conversation about like, hey, you might have hit your ceiling here, but let's talk about what other roles, like I've worked with you for 2 years. I know your strengths. Like, let's talk about what your next role is, even if it's not here. And like, I do wish we normalized that more. I do think like now in my fractional and independent role, I'm a job hopper, having so many different experiences has broadened my perspectives, has given me more nuanced tools in my toolkit. And given me a different appreciation for how to approach building environments that reinforce the values, the behaviors, what things should and should not be. Normalize change.
Totally. Right, ladies, I'm conscious we've covered so much in this chat and I could go probably for another 3 hours. But I've got to take my kids swimming and you go, well, Kim, you're just starting your day. What one knowledge bomb action would you like people to leave this call with? Kim, we'll go with you first. No pressure.
Your career is your own. Define excellence for yourself. Define your perfect life and how your career fits into that. And build from there.
Love that. No, that's great. And Sam?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna build off of that because I think it is. Thank you, Kim, because it's something that I need a reminder of sometimes too. So hearing it from another person, I'm like, yes. I would say don't hesitate to bring your identity into this when you're going through this evaluation that Kim has just recommended, which I think everybody needs to do like at least once a year. Like we just need to, we're constantly inundated with so much new stuff that like you need to check back in with yourself. When you're checking back in with yourself, be conscious of what other factors of your identity are coming into this. Because sometimes it's more nuanced and we don't, we're like, okay, I'm doing this for me. But then you sit back and you're like, actually, no, I'm doing it because it's an expectation of my family. Or maybe it's not even an expectation, but I've seen them do it. And so I assume that they're expecting me to also like want to do this thing. And I've never, so I would say like, pay attention to the periphery things in your personal life that are maybe imposing themselves on what you should be doing, what you should be valuing, what should make you happy, what should make you feel excellent or outstanding. And then decide like, what am I discarding and what am I hanging on to? Because our cultural identity is something that is so unconscious that sometimes we'll say, well, I'm doing this for myself, and it still doesn't feel in alignment. And that's where we feel stuck. And so I would say, go that extra step deeper. Once you've said, okay, I'm doing this for myself, just ask a couple of those questions to say, but am I really? Are there other maybe factors that are impacting this? And if no, amazing. But if yes, okay, let's get under those. And now that's authentically what you want to be doing. So that would just be my added color to that. But I think it's such an important exercise, Tim.
Yeah, so true. There's so much about everything that we talk about on leadership that is all about self-reflection, and it's so true for everyone. But honestly, ladies, it's been such a pleasure having this conversation with you both, and I feel like we could probably have another 10 episodes on different themes and tangents that we've gone on. But thank you both very much for your time.
Thank you, Claire. This was so fun. Bye, everyone.
Exciting. So nice to see you all.